That's always a good place to be in.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go. The only way out is through. Live, not live. Let's record it. Okay. A little gallows humor.
My mind has been going in circles, in complete turmoil, grappling with my feelings of loss, despair, and grief. I have stopped trying to understand the why and accept the senselessness of the situation. I have accepted a purpose without grasping the purpose, if that makes any sense. After what we discussed in the last year, I agree that there could be no reason Hashem could give me that would even suffice. I was never able to comprehend how a child of an abusive parent still loves their parent, despite the continual mistreatment they endure. I do now. Despite the punishment and suffering I feel, Hashem is the only one I turn to, beseeching and begging for salvation from. I wake up every morning and say Moida Ani and thank Hashem for giving me life so I can protect and take care of my children. Yet when I utter the words, it's intensely painful. Never in my life have I felt such intense anger and hate towards anything. In this lifetime, I will never forgive Hashem for what He has done. He knew the repercussions that this would incur. I know that one day in another world we will see a bigger picture. However, in this world, the way we were designed to live and raise a family, I will never forgive Hashem for taking a father away from his children, a husband away from his wife. Which brings me to the thought. We will never understand why we suffer in this world, but there has to be an end goal. There must be some tangible end to the suffering, because living with the knowledge that suffering is eternal can't be sustainable. So, is that what Mashiach is about? Is that what it actually is? An end goal where we as Hashem's people will no longer suffer. It can't just be the process of illuminating the darkness in this world, because if that were the case, then Mashiach would be here. For light is being spread throughout humanity on a moment-to-moment basis. Yet we as a people, humanity is still suffering, which makes me think that the end goal has not been reached. Why was the Rebbe so obsessed with Mashiach? Is it because it is the end goal where there will actually be a time when suffering will cease? A tangible time in the story of our people that we should hold on to, where Techiyas and Mason will happen, wars will end and no one will suffer. I tell my daughter we will daven every day for Mashiach to come, but we can't be disappointed if he doesn't. I don't want her beliefs to be shut down every day because the hope will become unsustainable. Why are we people holding on to this hope when the Rebbe himself couldn't bring it, and when for more than 5,000 years it's proven to never have come? Is it real?
Yeah. I'll tell you, the first reaction I had when I read what you wrote, and I'll hear it again, is that, I don't know if you know this, but there's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to, what was his name? Katsav? He was president of Israel. Not Katsav, someone else. Ben Tzvi. So there's the prime minister, there's the presidents. And he writes to the president, why am I not calling you Nasi? Because in English, in Hebrew, president of a country is a Nasi. Rosh HaMamshalah is the prime minister, and Nasi is the president. So he's explained to him why he doesn't use the word Nasi, which is also, we know, the name for a Rebbe, a Nasi, a leader. So the Rebbe writes, this is an unbelievable thing. He writes that the reason is because from when I was a young child, the Rebbe's writing, I always imagined what the real Nasi would be, the real Mashiach, a person that would arrive and finally bring to end all the suffering that we've gone through. And this is what he says, a Mashiach that will bring world peace and bring all the beauty and all that. And when we will finally come to terms of all the suffering that we've gone through. That's the thing he focuses on. And he brings the expression, Oitcha Hashem Kenaftabi. I thank God for punishing me, for oppressing me. Oppressing me. Not punishing, oppressing. So when you read this and you said, is Mashiach about that? It's interesting. Oh, and then the Rebbe concludes, that's why I don't use the word Nasi in anyone except that image that I have. Because it would be like a compromise if I use it on a... So he apologizes that he doesn't want to use the word president, because he thinks the Rebbe has in his mind the ultimate president, so to speak. That's what came to mind when you read this, and I think absolutely. Even though, frankly, we want Mashiach, and we want a better world, even if we didn't suffer. We don't need to suffer to want Mashiach, so to speak. But there's no question that the biggest challenge in history has been human suffering. The biggest questions asked by poets and by singers and by musicians and by artists and writers and thinkers and lovers was always, why human suffering? It's always been the question. From Job, Eve, all the way to our time, the Holocaust, and then as you are now experiencing. So it's interesting that the Rebbe does not just talk about the beauty of Mashiach, but talks about it also as a time where not just suffering will end, but we'll also understand why we had to go through it. I'm not even sure what that means. Will we actually understand it? Like I said to you the other times we spoke, it's hard for me to imagine that you can ever understand why the Holocaust happened. I have no problem saying that God has his plan, and we'll never get it. But how could a human mind wrap itself around if 1.5 million innocent children going up in smoke? It's not about because we're not brilliant. I mean, I can't see what kind of wisdom are we going to gain that will suddenly understand that. I could say we could understand the whole picture, that everything had to happen, and here's the end story, which is a good ending. But it does appear that there's some deeper mystery to human suffering that will be seemingly understood. But the bottom line is, it's not a question whether it's understood. It's if we're at peace with it. So I really think that, unfortunately, you are from the select, privileged few that have been forced to ask the question in your lifetime in ways that many of us don't. As I mentioned to you, I stand in awe and at your feet because I did not go through something of this nature. So for me, Mashiach is more not just theoretical. I mean, I understand the beauty of it, and also it would be great that we should not have any more death and no more suffering and no more loss. But then there are those like yourself. We're talking about the only way out is through. You are now consumed. You went through the fire. You're going through the fire, I should say. I maintain what I've told you. I think your attitude is the healthy attitude. I think it's better to be angry at God than to have no God, because at least you have someone to be angry at, someone to yell at. And God I know is very secure, so we don't have to protect his interests. Like the previous Rebbe said to another Rebbe who wanted to defend the Holocaust, he says, God doesn't need lawyers and advocates. He could take care of himself. And you come to the precipice, that place where life meets death, and meaning meets absurdity. And that's where you are. And how could that make sense? There's no way that you're going to be able to make sense of it. It really makes no difference. I mean, even if all the answers are given to you, this, as you put it, a husband taken away from his wife, a father from children, that sentence alone is enough to really silence all of us. So as you know, I'm not here to explain things. I'm here to just be with you as a friend and with all of you. And that's what your friends are here for as well. And that gives us strength. I don't think, as I told you, I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Let's be openly transparent here. But it will get better. You'll get stronger. That's what's going to happen. You're going to get stronger. And you'll be stronger for your children, and your children will get stronger. And then, I don't know if you'll ever be able to say you make sense, but I think you'll say, here's what I built as a result. That's the story, A lot of Holocaust survivors actually would have been upset. They would have been a lot happier if they were taken and their relatives remained. Because in the way that, if you're taken, you don't suffer. The suffering is only on this end of the story. Your husband is not suffering. I mean, he's suffering for you and for the children, but on his personal, he sees things we don't see. And he can see you, you can't see him. So that's always an advantage. However, it's like a one-way mirror, Mashiach itself, to me, I think, is exactly like with God itself. It's the only saving grace. Because even if our lives are going well, and thank God your life was going well before this happened, and everybody has their blessings. But to what end? We are comfortable, we shop, we eat, we're having fun. To me, that was always, thank God, better than that than, God forbid, loss. But it's also not really an end. What's the tachlis of that? And then we die. Let's say we all die old age and healthy, 120 years old, and then our children take over. It seems almost like, I'm not saying boring, but it sounds like, what's the point of it all? Huh?
You're just going through the motions.
Yeah, but I know most of us can do it. I remember, I think I mentioned it, when my father passed away, he said Shiva for 7 days, you're like completely disconnected from the world around you. Then I remember, after you get up from Shiva, you take a walk around the block. I walked with my sister, and it's like a door opened between two worlds, and almost nothing else matters. You don't care about what you look like. You don't care what you feel. It's like almost materialism is meaningless, literally. power, money, all this becomes like empty. And I remember saying to my sisters, I say, so how long do you think this is going to last? And I think she said, yeah, a few days, then the door will close, and we'll go back to the game, to the playground of life, where we, go through our motions and the merry-go-round. And so Mashiach, to me, stripping it even from the word, and I don't need the Hebrew word or the Jewish, the Torah words, it simply means that there's a destination. There's fruit to be born from our efforts. To me, it's the only way that makes sense of life. Actually, without Mashiach, life to me would make no sense, because there's a God and there's a Torah and there's guidelines. But if there's no destination, it means all the efforts, the sacrifices. I mean, millions and millions of sacrifices that people made, our parents and grandparents, to what end? And when someone asks a question, your child asks you, why is it worth being a good person? It's much easier to be selfish. Why should I be a good person? Everybody dies. Everybody's going to be eaten by the same worms, whether you're a good person or a bad person. So why do I have to be good? Very simple, childish question. That I know, most people, their answer is, and you could ask yourself the question too, it's not just from children. Most people say, because it's the right thing to do. Because that's what God wants. It makes you feel better. But these, let's be honest, they're very arbitrary. They're not absolute answers. It's okay. So if I don't feel so good, let's say I feel good being not so good to others. And you see it all day. People do whatever they want to do. The only answer is that the goodness we do does not die. Your body may die, but the goodness you do lives on. And it lives on in your children, and in your grandchildren, and in your friends, and your community, and the mark you make in this world. That does not die. And therefore, it's absolutely worth it, because it's not just what you do now. Now is the right thing to do. It means that it plants a seed that forever, perpetually will change the world, and Mashiach is the realization of those seeds. They come to fruition. That's how I see it. So to me, it's like, without that, then everything we do, not that we have to do it for, Shalei L'Shma or something, for other, but that makes it all real. That's the only way you can justify and explain and really say that, what, goodness has prevailed. Thousands of years, Abraham stood up to a pagan world who were all selfish and to their own things. He stood up and said, no, we're going to be people of virtue. And he fought the whole world. Frankly, till a few hundred years ago, what were most of the governments in the world? They were monarchs, empires, doing whatever they wanted. If they happened to be benevolent, we were lucky, and if not, we weren't. That's what they were. And now we have a world that, I'm not going to say everyone's a good person, but goodness is a virtue, a standard that everybody accepts. It's not a world where dog eats dog is maybe the reality on the ground. But you see, people stand up when they see injustices. They don't have answers. They think gun control is going to solve the problems in the schools. When really what will solve the problems is maybe a moment of silence and a recognition that there's an authority in your life. Huh?
That thing that your brother wrote?
Yeah.
Instilling values.
Oh.
You just said the exact same thing that you just said now.
Okay.
Yeah. A moment of silence.
Oh, really? Because I just spoke about it last night at length.
He wrote an article.
Same thing happened again. They both said the same thing without even knowing.
He wrote an article about it.
Well, one of his.
It's online
I'll
about
send
like
it to you.
instilling values is what you need to do to kids.
Okay. You don't have to
It's
say
not so much
example of
about
the
gun
moment of
control.
silence in certain schools.
Okay. I just spoke about this a few
And
times.
improved, showing to prove like that a success instead of values.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? You said that, so in regards to Mashiach, the goodness that we do doesn't die, and we're planting the seeds so that ultimately when it comes into fruition, we have Mashiach, and we were a part of it, even if our bodies, yeah? But how do we live for that when that has been but a theory, almost like a myth, like something that I personally believe in, but if I would let it drive my actions, I would feel at a loss, because so many people, much more holy, much more committed than I, have talked about it and lived by it, and have died by it.
So what's the question?
The question is to gain comfort in the fact that that what we're doing now is going to create a better future with the coming of Mashiach. For me, doesn't give me so much comfort in the pain and struggles of this life, of our lives today. For Simi, Mashiach means her husband returning to her. It's not about utopia, it's about something that she cannot get today. But for the struggles that we experience today.
Please, you want to come?
I could sit here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome, hello. How are you?
Yeah, what?
You know each other?
I know his Schwicker and Schwickerette. Right? My sister and his wife used to share a bedroom years ago. You know that?
Yes, I did know that.
Sharon?
Waxman.
Right. She's a writer, right? She's a journalist.
Yeah.
She is. She's a busy lady.
Well, anyway,
I'm not a busy lady, so I can be here.
we're all busy, but there are priorities.
I guess I just wonder.
So we're talking about, obviously you know what we're talking about. So what's your question? I'm not clear.
I just wonder, the Mashiach as a driving force in this world for our pains and struggles falls a little flat for me. Not because I don't believe in Mashiach, but because it doesn't help me with my daily struggles.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, I was in the middle of talking about it, but I think Mashiach has been misrepresented,
Right.
like so many other Jewish concepts,
Right.
and become some type of either abstract or unrealistic or fantasy, instead of seeing it as a very viable part of our lives. And as usual, when you present something in that way, we get stereotyped, and then we either dismiss it or we completely misunderstand it. I deal with this on a daily basis because trying to explain ideas, universal ideas from Torah in psychologically and personal terms, is the first thing right away. People are like, 1 second, that's not what I thought God was, or that's not what I thought Torah was, or that's not what I thought mitzvahs were. Let's be honest, most people's knee-jerk reaction, when I say most, I'll talk now the secular world, then we'll talk about the religious world. In the secular world, most people's knee-jerk reaction to words like God, Torah, mitzvahs, religion, Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, knee-jerk would be guilt, anger, dogma, punishment, punitive, what did I say? A few other such words, all negative.
Yeah.
That's the knee-jerk reaction. In the frum world, many also have the same reaction, but above all, it's irrelevant. It's not relevant to me. Like if you say to someone the word soul, most people say soul, that's music, soul music. They will not associate soul with religion. As a matter of fact, there's statistics that show that 90% of Americans, and probably of the world even, have some type of spiritual identity, and even God. But if you ask them about religion, only 40% will associate with the religion. You see the discrepancy, 40 to 50% discrepancy. Because religion is associated with things like ritual, laws, rules, tradition, community, synagogues. That's what religion is. And spirituality is associated with free-spiritedness, even with psychedelics, with transcendence, with music, sex, rock and roll, and drugs. Well, people much more associate spirituality with than with religion. So that's a major disconnect. That's a great dissonance, and that's a big challenge to get over. Because, in a way, you could say all of Chassidus came to really resolve that. Because Chassidus came to reintroduce the soul of Judaism into the rules. That Judaism is not just based on mechanics and guidelines, but that there's our soul. So if you compare it, let's say, to a musical sheet of music, if you don't know how to read it, it's gibberish. Someone knows how to play it, it's magic. That's how I see it. So most of Judaism today is mostly behavioral, and therefore mechanical. It's like reading musical notes without hearing music. That's a pretty bad scene, I would say. So that's when you come to Mashiach, the same thing. Now, I came to this through hard-earned effort because I grew up in the system and I knew all these words. And I came to realize that the words are not being translated right. Or they're not even being translated altogether. They're just relying on people. Oh, there's a guy sitting on a white throne, with a king sitting on a throne in heaven with a long white beard, and he's waiting to strike us with lightning when we misbehave. You tell me how many people associate with that juvenile or even almost like a cartoonish view of God. It's not even cartoonish, it could be tragic. Or the idea that faith is escape from reality. I was asked once on a radio show, there was this skeptical guy, and he was I don't know, he thought maybe he got one of these religious fanatics on the show, like me, and he says to me, so tell me, Rabbi, his voice was dripping with cynicism. He said, did you ever have a crisis of faith? Literally, that was his question. I giggled. It was a radio. I was on the phone. So I laughed. He said, why are you laughing? I said, a crisis of faith. Every second of my life I have a crisis of faith. I knew exactly where he was coming from. So I said, every second. He says, what do you mean? I said, well, if a good God allows injustice and suffering, wouldn't that be a crisis of faith? If you're a thinking person? Mm-hmm. I said, you probably think that faith is like for the weak. Faith is for the stupid who use it as a crutch. I said, as it's an absence of reason. Since you're not a reasonable person, you rely on this crutch and escape called faith. I said, that's not faith. Faith, real faith, mature faith, is that you have all the reason in the world, and there's more to life than reason. That's what faith is. Because I said to him, I needed to get back at even with him after his trying to, mock me. So I said to him, let me ask you something. You have a problem with innocent children being killed? He said, yeah. I said, why? If you don't believe in God, who says there's justice in this world? It's an unjust world. Survival of the fittest. Every day, innocent prey are being killed by predators in the wild. So what's the big thing? So a child was killed by a terrorist or by a Nazi. Why should it bother you? I said, a person of faith bothers them every second because they do believe in a higher goodness, and they do believe in justice, and they do believe in a just God. So when something like that happens, they can't sleep at night. Why can you sleep? And he was left pretty speechless. He says, I guess I do believe in some type of higher justice. So I said, okay, so then what, which is the truth. There's no reason, it shouldn't bother you at all. Does anyone bothered by a deer being killed by a lion? It's like, or that when you wake up in the morning, you kill a few thousand or a million bacteria when you get out of bed. I just saw that online, yeah. Nobody even knows about it because you don't even see it happening. And you don't see blood. Okay, fine. My point that I'm saying is that when you take Mashiach now in that context, strip it of everything you've ever heard. Even if, I don't know if it's easy to do, to erase your hard drive. But you sometimes have to do that. If I was to translate Mashiach without any Hebrew or any Torah words, I would simply say, when you plant a seed, this is the flower. The flower are collective flowers of all the activities we've done in life. We and the people before us is that stage of life. You don't have to use the word Mashiach. You can use whatever word you use. How does that sound? How does like a world of flowers and music and harmony fill the whole world? That's how I see it. But I worked hard at getting rid of the mistranslations, really. Because if you really read the Rambam or Chassidus, you'll see that the meaning of it has nothing to do with. Also, it's been very Christianized. Mashiach is like the second coming of Jesus or something like that. So it's like also fantasy, In the context of what we're speaking about, look, it's hard to resist the temptation that when you have a loss like Simi you're going through, to not say, I wish Mashiach comes and I have my husband back, and all this pain goes away. Of course, that's what we all would love to see, and I'm not denying that there is some value to that, but not like you wrote in your note about not being disappointed. I think what you have to believe is that whatever we do, whatever you do now, whatever you do with your children, whatever you do as a mother, since you're here, is still a piece of Mashiach that you're creating in this world that may come to fruition tomorrow morning, which would be the greatest, or may come the next day. So it's not so built on, okay, I do this and my husband's going to come back. I don't think you can really look at it like that type of tit-for-tat thing. It's more of a collective. That's the general approach. But we do absolutely believe that there will be a reunification. But I think the key thing is to be also realize that our good deeds are in a way prepare the ground for that. So I'm not sure every one of us has to find a way to answer that. But I have an aunt who lost her husband in a car accident. She lives on Carroll Street here. Her name is Chevi Lipsker. She was a Majeski. So my uncle was Fitzy Lipsker, Yitzhak Lipsker. He was a young man, 40s, and was killed. And that was that. She was in the car. It was snow, ice, left a bunch of children. And she lives pure fantasy. She is living. Mashiach is coming any second. She'll be back with her husband. She's a normal person, but she definitely lives in denial and a fantasy. Huh? Yeah, I don't know how she manages it, and she dresses well. She's put together. But it's not even a consider. She's just, that's where she lives. She's already 20 years, over 20 years like that. So whenever she sees me, she says, "No, when is it happening already?" So I say, "You know better than I. You're the one living with it. I'm living in denial. I'm living in Golis." But she lives with it. I'm not going to tell her what to do. That works for her. Obviously, that's that. It's hard for me to imagine living like that because it just becomes, you like almost have to live in a type of certain sense of urgency every moment. And how could you really live and be normal? But she does. I'm not suggesting you will. I don't think you're that way. You're not wired that way. So I don't think you're too, rational to be that way. But, Practical, maybe that's the word. But I don't know. I don't know if that's where we have to be going. Even to me, the Mashiach is the thing that gave hope to the Jews who were marching to the gas chambers, because they knew that today we die, but tomorrow we live again, and if it won't be us, it'll be our children. I think that's a tremendous source of power, because it means you can't really kill me, because something stays forever, and it will come to fruition. That I think is the essence of really the power of it. That's what kept the Jews in Egypt going, and they kept them in the most difficult times. And that's why it is vital to be connected to it. But that's not exactly saying that right now I'm reunited with my husband tomorrow. That's what I'm saying. But
that makes it kind of harder.
Of course. Look, there's no easy way through this. Let's not kid ourselves. I don't care. Even if you're the most person, even if you have the deepest faith, and Mashiach and the Rabbi and Hashem, that doesn't mean. I think it gives. Look, I think it's more of an empowerment thing. You have more power when you do that, because you have something to go with. I feel sad for people who have losses and they really have nothing to turn to. They have no beliefs. So where do they escape to? Where do they run to? So they have to run to things that are unhealthy. That's the only option, to hide their, to relieve themselves, to find some relief. The truth is, I find that everybody who suffers somewhere finds, whether they call it God or Mashiach. As I said, the words meaning are just semantics. It's really, they all come to some type of deeper strength. There's no question. That's a given. I was close friends with Leonard Cohen. Right? We talked about it, I think, one of the times.
I think so.
So Leonard Cohen, he died recently. Yeah. He's a man that, he's a singer, songwriter, poet, and suffered a lot. He went through a lot of darkness. He suffered a lot of depression. And they say that he made depression fashionable because he sang about it and he spoke about it. I don't know if that's an interesting way to put it, but I mean to say that he was very open. And I saw that. He's a man of God. He says it in his songs. He speaks about God. His last song was actually a Yom Kippur thing. You heard that? Hineni, you called it.
I don't know.
Hineni.
Song, but I would now listen to it.
You got to hear Hineni from him. It's awesome. It's his last song that he sang. You could see he's speaking. He's basically saying goodbye, and going to. He says Hineni, here I am, God. But it's very raw. And very irreverent. It's not exactly, it's not a.
Easy to listen to.
It's pretty very powerful song. So I talked to him about this a lot because he went through it, and he said to me always, he said, "There's not even a question. Anyone that's either you dropped acid, as he put it, or you suffered, you always come back to the source of it all. That there's a God." He says, "Call it whatever you want to call it, but there's no way that there's something deeper there." And some people come through it only through darkness. because they realize then the superficial life that you so much rely on has no value for you when you need that. What value does it have? You could have all the money in the world and be a suffering, crying, your heart is bleeding. So suddenly you realize all the security, so-called, the things that gave you security have no real value. So what you're left with only is what your spirit has, things that are not tangible. So there's no question everybody some way goes there, but when you have it already ingrained in you like you do, to me that's probably that's why you're surviving even, despite how difficult it is. I think, so to me, God, Mashiach, soul, it's all different words for basically a deeper reality that we access and we need when things are difficult. That's what it comes down to put it as simple as possible. And yes, it's very different than what you hear in Hebrew school, let's put it that way, even in Chabad schools. Because there they talk about it far more. I remember when I was in 4th grade, I remember our teacher, Rabbi Fogelman, he got us excited. Why? Mashiach comes, ice cream is going to grow on trees. Now we love ice cream. Who doesn't love ice cream? And I was always, as a kid, I remember, I can't wait for the ice cream. You get a little older and you realize, I don't know if that's exactly the case. So I went to him. He's still around. I once asked him, a few years ago, I said to him, I'm 61 years old. I'm no longer in 4th grade. And I said to him, Rabbi Fogelman, you created a fantasy in my mind that I almost left all of Judaism just because when I found out it's not ice cream, I almost abandoned it all,
You should change the way
It was a joke, obviously.
Yeah, right.
So he laughed. He said to me, I was trying to explain it to you in a way that you could relate to it. But I understood what he meant, Actually, it'd be pretty cool if ice cream grew on trees, I guess we wouldn't appreciate it that much anyway. It'd be too available. I have to be able to cheat a little. You have to feel like...
You should teach it more tangibly.
1,000%, of course.
Yeah, but the Rebbe screamed it so much all the time.
But the Rebbe, when the Rebbe said it, he knew what he meant, and those that understood the code understood what he meant. Those that didn't.
Right.
Because it's so easy. It's so easy to... I'm trying to explain it here. One second, I have to understand your question. Do you mean what he meant, when is it coming, or do you mean what he meant Mashiach is? As I said, it has many dimensions to it, but at the end of the day, it's if you think of it this way, that God created a world, Basiligani, right, a garden, and man has wandered, man and woman, we human beings have wandered away from it. The garden has become a jungle in many ways. And with its pursuit of materialism, the injustices people do to each other, all the pain and suffering we go through on all levels. And Mashiach, to me, is bringing it back to that garden. Well, to me, that's the meaning. If you read all the Basiligani Maimorim, that's the Maimor that talks about it, is coming back to the garden and realizing the garden never disappeared. It's always there beneath the surface. And every good act we do, when we behave virtuously, we behave kindly and compassionately, we release a little energy, and that energy is, we'll call it Mashiach energy, and when it all accumulates, it erupts into a world of goodness.
It's more like a new reality. It's not like
100%, completely a new consciousness.
So it's not like I'm saying like
We don't feel like that.
You don't need any miracles to happen.
But I'm saying
In the beginning.
Like I'm saying, it's not necessarily a stage. It's really just our reality, but perspective, and it does change a little bit.
It changes dramatically because today materialism is an end in itself. And then materialism is a means to spiritual growth, basically. So when a person today is wise enough to realize that material success and selfish gain and superficial interests are temporary, and there's some deeper cause or deeper purpose for what we do, they are in a microcosm living Mashiach. Now, most of us are not capable of maintaining that 24/7. Well, the Rebbe, what do you mean? First of all,
What was the whole concept of the Rebbe being Mashiach mean?
okay, great question. I didn't even talk about that because it's almost irrelevant, frankly, from my point of view, but I'll talk about it in a
Oh, we
moment.
don't have to talk about it. If you don't want
No, I will, because I want to just... But you see, that to me is that's a technicality. The leader who's going to lead people. The first thing is, what are we leading to? That's the sad thing. People talk about the Rebbe and the identity of Mashiach and they don't even know where we're going. And that could be simply because people are, again, superficial. It's easy just to say the Rebbe's Mashiach, he'll lead us wherever, and that's that. Anyone that learns a little Chassidus, even Tanya, Rambam, some basics, realizes Mashiach really is a state of affairs in the world. And just like there was a Moses that led the Jews out of Egypt, there's a Mashiach that leads us out of this consciousness to that consciousness.
I see.
That's what. So it's a leader that has that higher consciousness and teaches us how to achieve it. That's the way I would put it. But most people will not define it that way because they just it's again it's lip service. It's almost meaningless.
I never heard it being described like that.
I know. That's sad. And you are someone who grew up in the system. You went to the
Not the
yeshivas.
system, but different system. But yeah.
No, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I did never.
I mean, say you're not a secular person out there that never heard the word Mashiach before.
No.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. What I just said is as close as it is, and what I'm saying is the closest, in my opinion, the truest definition. It's not spoken that way. Absolutely not.
Right.
Ask people. How many people can even describe that if Mashiach comes right now, what will happen? Like what will happen to Eastern Parkway and Kingston Avenue, and to all of us? What will happen to the Frock? I know some people who'll say they'll burn it up in flames. It'll be burned at the stake. With the two of you, the two Frock witches will be hung up.
Very good.
How's that?
My kids ask me.
That's a good quote you could pull out and say. The witches of Salem. I don't mean that in any serious way, obviously. The point is that I'll just give you a little example. I'll give you two examples. In 1991, so I was, of course, busy writing Farbrengens. And that's where the Rebbe would speak. And he spoke about this topic many, many times then. And once he spoke, he said that he's getting letters from people that are saying they're afraid because when Mashiach comes, they're going to lose everything that they built up in this life. Their equity and their money and their homes and their whatever they collected. That's where the Rebbe began the Farbrengen that way. And he smiled. He said, "There's nothing to be afraid of, because when Mashiach comes, it's not. Nothing's going to be minus. You're only going to get more, not less."
And you won't care about it.
But that's not what he even said. You know what he said? He said, "Golos, goila," and geula is the same word, except with one difference, an aleph. So goila means golos, right? Exile or displacement. Geula is goila with an aleph. So he said, everything you have, you'll have now, then too. But you'll know the aleph within it, the unity, the achdus, the Hashem Echad, aluf shalom, however he put it. And I'll just give you two examples, because obviously I teach about it, speak about it. One is talk about a dry cleaners. I know that sounds weird, but it's the real story. True dry cleaners. It's like I got a cramp here.
We could take an
We take a
intermission.
break.
No, it's fine. No, my foot was just in the wrong position. So the Rebbe writes in a letter to a person who owned a laundromat, or I guess the dry cleaners, and he writes that everything is a lesson in life. And he says, so what's the lesson from dry cleaning? So the Rebbe writes that what's the essence of this innovation of cleaners, is that you buy a new garment, you wear it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. At some point it gets soiled, dirty, wrinkled. And, at some point, if you're a human being, you're not going to want to wear it again. So no, you give it to the cleaners, and what they do is they immerse it into water, and warm water, not cold water, and mix it with chemicals that get rid of the different stains, and then place it under a heavy press, and you have a fresh garment. So the Rebbe says, the lesson is this: Neshama shenasata bi taharahi. Everyone comes to this world with a pure soul, but then life breaks us, and we get wrinkled and stained and jaded and all that. So you think, okay, at some point, you get resigned to a difficult life. So no, the soul is immersed in water. Water is Torah, ein mayim ela Torah, in spiritual rejuvenation. And not cold water, but warm water, meaning passionate and warmth and love and all that. And chemicals are different mitzvahs that clean out different stains that we assume. And then the press is a Kabbalah's oil, which means a type of sense of responsibility or pressure that you answer to something higher. And that refreshes the person, and you can go through this process many times in life. The reason I'm mentioning it is this is how Mashiach consciousness looks at cleaners. They see the deeper meaning in everything. I'll give you another example. I was once speaking at a medical conference. Now, I'm not a doctor. They wanted me to talk about medicine of the future. So I spoke about the idea of eradication of death and disease and illness and all that. And I explained because the soul and body the soul doesn't run out of energy. So why should body and soul have to separate? Why can't we live forever? If you put, for example, water into a glass, except for the factor of evaporation, the water doesn't have to disappear, the glass. So why would a soul and body at some point separate from each other, which leads to disease, infection, and death? So I said because the body is like punctured. Since we have a body that's not complete, so if you make holes in the glass, then the water is going to ultimately run out. When Mashiach comes, matter and spirit will be reunited because the material world will not have all its infections and its distractions and can contain spiritual energy forever and ever. When I finished my talk, a doctor got up, the head doctor there, and he said, okay, very nice, beautiful, but what will happen with all doctors when Mashiach comes? So after the prerequisite joke that we all make, that's why maybe doctors charge so much, for a long retirement, I said, well, doctors then, instead of fighting pain and suffering and disease and death and so on, doctors will, because they have an intimate understanding of human anatomy and biology and chemistry and all that, they can teach us the secrets of the divine that lie inside this human entity, because we say, from our flesh I behold God. And I elaborated a bit on that. And I kid you not, the doctors got up and there was a standing ovation, because they were like the idea that that's what they would do. So what I'm saying, these are examples of a consciousness that's different than today. Today, we're dealing with, again, everything on the surface level. But when you look with the eyes of the Aleph that I mentioned, then the same reality that we have has deeper meaning to it. And that's how I would explain the Messianic age. That the same world, but you see the inner dimension at work. It's just like any trained eye looks at something. So most people will just see the dots, and someone who can see deeper will connect the dots and see the bigger part, the bigger picture. It's like seeing the horizon instead of or like seeing, you look at a film, instead of frame by frame, which is our lives, you see the whole story. Talk about what we're discussing, the only way out is through. That's what it is. You're right, we deal with frames. A frame in your life now has been a disastrous frame, I should say. Your husband was taken from you, the father of your children, a death, premature in the worst possible way. And it's just, aborted so many dreams and everything that is disrupted and changed. But it's a frame. It's a frame that's not, the movie moves on. But we don't see the rest. We see only the pieces. You could say Mashiach comes, you'll see the whole thing. You see the whole picture of history, unfolding. Now we see the little bits and pieces. And if you can go up to the top of the mountain, you'll be able to see more. So we try our best to try to see as much as we can see, but we're still limited. To me, this is Messianic talk. This is not the way they talk about it in our schools. No, I know that. If everyone talked about it this way, I think we'd have Mashiach already here. Because then they know what they're working towards. How could you even work this way? You don't even know what you're working towards. Ask, go today to Crown Heights to anyone, just randomly interview, say, what are we supposed to do to bring Mashiach? They'll say, do mitzvahs, do good deeds. But then say, if you don't know what you're shooting for, how could you know what to do now if you don't know where it's going?
I still don't really know what I should be doing.
Okay.
I mean, I totally understand what you're...
I think two things. You have to be able...
Is it really going to make a difference?
That's a different question. Okay. But like the guy that was walking on the beach and was throwing these clams back into the water. So someone says, why are you throwing these clams back? He says, he wants to save their lives. Why they're going to dry up. He said, but there are billions of clams.
Right.
So he says, What difference does it make? So he said, but to this clam, it makes a difference. The bottom line is, you have to think of it sometimes in terms of you and your family, how you can make a difference for them. I sincerely believe, without even a question, that living with a Mashiach consciousness will make your life a better life.
Right.
Every part of your life is a healthier life. So why would you want to not do that? Now, what will it achieve? We're told that if you do that, you do it, and I do it, and all of us accumulatively do it, it'll achieve something. But it's not.
Spreading that message will help others achieve that same thing. Even if I'm saying that's the thing that I could do. Let's say.
Everyone in this room has children.
Yes. So
you have children. You're teaching them every day by example, by words. You want them to be the best possible people they can be. I don't need. I'm sure I can assume that. That means you want to give them the best possible attitude to things, how to deal with good times, with difficult times. If you translate this, what we're talking about, this type of consciousness, let's just call it consciousness, you're going to give them a much healthier way of looking at things. So they don't get caught up in either, the minutia and the details. They sense a bigger picture. And now the result of that, I can't see how that cannot make them better and everyone around them better. Now, we believe absolutely that if we do, and the Rebbe said this clearly, we're at the threshold, and maybe it takes another little tip of the scale. I can't tell you what it's going to take, but that's the direction we're going. The result is the full-blown Mashiach thing. But you still do it. I'm not going to not stop doing it because I don't know if it's going to come today or tomorrow. That was my point. Now, I understand in the situation we're talking here, it would be nice to say, if I did it,
You see the reward.
we'll have Shua back here in the body. Obviously, that would be beautiful to say, but I don't think we can correlate it directly to this and that will happen, which is what you wrote as what you want to teach your children. What the Jews always had, which I thought was always powerful and healthy people, that they don't need to necessarily see the result of their good actions right away. It would be beautiful to see it. But sometimes, I could tell you from my own work, I meet people 20, 30 years that I haven't seen them, and they tell me how something I did back then changed their lives. If you're blessed, you see it. Sometimes you don't see it. I was just, as I said, in San Antonio. Literally, I can't tell you, maybe 10, 15 people came over to me and told me how my book changed their lives 20 years ago. So I said, why don't you let me know? Not that they have to let me know, but it's always good to hear from people. Or they watch the videos of this. Sometimes it's good for us to know. Maybe it's not always good for us to know. Maybe it keeps you humbler if you don't always know. But my point is that goodness, we believe firmly, changes the world. And that's that. There's no two ways around that. If you want to argue about that, we could. If you want to challenge that. I don't even think you're asking just because what did you do wrong that this should happen? It's like you're saying, here we did goodness. Why should we have suffered? That we don't have an answer for. I don't have an idea. But collectively, people don't even appreciate it. And I also don't. I grew up in a free world. I grew up here. I was born in the United States. My father and my mother were born in Russia. Our grandparents, great-grandparents, you know the story of your grandfather, right? They lived hell, day and night. I can't even imagine. My father told me, you don't understand, 24/7 was fear. Every time you heard a sound outside, you thought they're coming to arrest you and maybe kill you. Constantly. How could children even, imagine you have children, you put them at night to sleep, and it's a peaceful night, right? They know they're going, imagine every night they don't, God forbid.
It's hard to we live in a different world.
Right. No, the reason I'm saying it is not because I'm saying it we have to sometimes appreciate.
Right.
I have no question, and this is clearly from the books in Zohar and other places, the reason we have such ease of life today is because the prices that were paid. That means we are closer to a messianic world. So this is not an accident that we're living in a world like this today. This is a direct reward, I don't say even reward, cause and effect of millions and millions of Mesiras Nefesh that people gave their lives for goodness. There's not even that. I am convinced of that. So we see results. To someone to say today that there's no blessings in our lives would be complete denial. It's not true. There are great blessings. Now, I am not taking away that there are also great challenges. But, we wouldn't be such close friends if it wasn't for these challenges. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm just trying to make a point. Your children will grow up to be unbelievable souls, greater than they would have been had this tragedy not happened. I have no question. And let me explain. I'm not saying it because of the tragedy. That's not. I wish it didn't, but because you have the presence and your dignity and aplomb and everything that you have carrying you is going to be the biggest loving example. It's not even what you say to them. And I really have to say it. Does anyone here but doubt that?
No, certainly not.
Now, why you have to bear the brunt of it, I have no answer to that. We just cry about it. But they will grow up and they will be strong people. Because also you can't take it for granted. And to you as a mother, I have completely no words. What can I tell you? But we're here and we get stronger. And I don't mean to, I just feel, I don't want to start going into messianic, what's the word, sermons.
Okay, I wouldn't believe you anyways.
So practically,
So dumb.
Good people become better under all circumstances. You know, I've seen people, yes, have suffered and become from good to bitter and bad. But that's not the case in this family here, so I'm not concerned. Yeah.
So practically in regards to Mashiach, in regards to like a healthy relationship with the need for Mashiach to come for Simi, it's about understanding that Mashiach is something that we all strive for, but not having the need for it regarding the return of Shua. Is that
Not stopping to have the consciousness despite not seeing your reward every day.
That's right.
It's a subtle line. I mean, it's hard. You see, you can't tell children or yourself that you'll do this and this, and we're going to see Tati or whatever you call him again. I just feel that it's not the way to do it, and not because you don't have that belief ultimately, but because I don't even know how to exactly articulate it. But I think we all understand that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know. And if your child asks you, you know, here, look at Simi, look at her family, they did all kinds of good things and look what happened. Mm-hmm. So who says something like that can't happen to us, God forbid? The answer is, we do what we have to do. And there is a God, and we pray that things should be good. And it's not always the way we understand it. And ultimately that has to be said if the question comes up. I don't really see a way around that, because what are you going to say? I think all healthy people have a very healthy element of, they dream about great things, but then they get practical and know what they have to do, and they don't say, you know, just my dreams are going to take over. Yeah. You can dream about, let's say, having a very successful business, but you still have to do the steps to get there. And then you believe and hope that these steps will lead to success. So I think it's always we all deal with that somewhat.
But it's hard for a kid to understand. Simi can understand the idea of Mashiach, but like I feel like, how do you give that over to a kid in like a tangible way? Like still wanting them to still do goodness. I'm saying, or like why would they just want to give up? I'm saying like they don't see Mashiach coming anytime soon.
But you know, interesting, children don't have that question as much as adults do. They don't think like that, children.
Really? Well, my son's 7 and he's like, Mashiach hasn't come for 5,000 years. Why would he come now? And it's 7. So I was like, yeah.
That's a really good question.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I would answer.
Yeah, like what would you tell them?
I would probably reframe what Mashiach means, because there's two parts to it. One part is correct, the technical person has not come 5,000 years. But I would tell them what I said today. There are blessings we have today that are very messianic blessings. We're living in Mashiach times. And you could show it with technology, with politics, with the comforts we have.
Right, change the idea of it.
Right, so say, you know what? You're right, the Mashiach person has not come. But we're no longer living under Nazis, and we have freedoms. to be whatever we want to be, without gzeros and decrees and other people trying to oppress us. That's how I would put it, and that has come. So the promises have been fulfilled. Look, I'm sure that children asked their parents during the pogroms and during the Holocaust, where all the promises we were told, and there they were real hell. I'm not sure what they said, but I'm sure they said something similar. That this is a nisayon, a test. It's short term. We'll get through it. I'm sure that's something of that nature. Today we don't, thank God, don't have to deal with that type of stuff. And I also believe, I speak my own language here maybe, but when people speak to me and ask me why the Rebbe's promise was not fulfilled and why Mashiach is not here, I honestly, I never have that question. I don't have such a question. Because there's a lot of things I don't know, what the big plan is. But I do know what we have to do. So I always say, what difference does it make? The question has to be, what are you going to do about it? What are you doing today and tomorrow? That's what a responsible person asks. I find even asking the question, don't get me wrong, I don't criticize anyone who asks the question. But to me personally, asking such a question is almost like a cop-out of doing what I have to do. Because I'm looking I'm looking almost for an excuse not to do it. I'm by nature a skeptic. I have many questions.
It's not just about what you do. Like, that's what she's saying, is it going to really make a difference? Because it's not like a cumulative thing. I'm saying...
But you see, to me, it comes down to this. If I'm running a marathon, I just need to know how to move my feet and run the marathon. I don't know about other people running the marathon and when they're going to reach the destination or not. That to me is how I would love to educate people, my children like that, to think like that. What are you doing about the life? Because, I saw this around me. I saw it. My father was this way. The Rebbe was this way. There was a problem. They never said, "Oh, can this be solved?" They always said, "Okay, what am I going to do to solve it as best as I can?" And almost like stepping as if you're a bystander and a spectator, then you say, "Okay, what's going to happen?" And you're holding score and so on. I'm just telling you my feeling on the matter. I think that it's not productive to really try to figure out why and when others are going to do. Leaders are leaders. You do what you have to do, and you're.
Do you live like that? Do you sense like you feel Mashiach more? Like you feel like you're. I'm saying, does it feel just tiresome? You're just going on every day doing that, but nothing's happening. Oh, but you feel the new reality. Is that what you're saying? Absolutely,
I feel it, and also I see it in people I deal with, because I can convey it. I know how to communicate it, so I see the effects on people. I have many questions. I could, of course, stop everything and just sit and philosophize and say, you know what, we did this and this and this and nothing's working. Or you say, you know what, here are the things I know that I have to do and I could do. In my case, completely personally, I feel I've not done what I should be doing, and that's completely my own procrastination and my own resistance. So I have no one to blame except myself. Now, some people maybe don't have that. I have complete confidence that you and I and everyone sitting here has a lot that we can do, and we have to focus on empowerment, not on why things aren't working. I really believe that.
Well, there's no real answers. So.
I always ask myself the question. I always ask people the same question: are you part of the problem or are you part of the solution? Okay, your son comes to you, tells you there's a problem. So the way I would respond, well, you know what? You're right. It's a problem, but we have to be part of the solution. Part of the problem is we just say, here's the problem, we state it, we analyze it, and we say, we hope someone else will solve it. It's really, I think it's a leadership way of thinking, really. That's what I think it is. You talk about consciousness. I think it's a certain type of approach that you look at everything as an opportunity or a challenge. I was never in the military, but I think of military example here. You're a I don't know.
But then at some point,
I just want to say one thing. You're in a lower rank person and you take orders from your superior. But then there's a setback. The enemy has conquered the city that you were supposed to protect. So you have to retreat. Mm-hmm. Some of us will give up and say, oh, this isn't going well. I'm out of here. Why would I even risk my life? For what? The commander-in-chief cannot afford such an attitude, right? Because so he looks at the situation, assesses it, okay, there was a setback, now we're going to figure out another way to move. I believe you can train people to think like the commander-in-chief and not like the person who's seeing the setback and reacting to it. That really comes down to, I think, the attitude that we have to have. I see it after Gimel Tammuz. I see Lubavitchers. I see how many of them behave. They're very victims. They're victims. I just cannot be a person who's a victim. I think we have to be maybe survivors, but we have to be proactive. And I think in the world that we live in, most people are reactive and not proactive. So maybe that's the way I would put it.
Right. Maybe that's where we're not seeing Mashiach.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's because it's a burnout. Whether we do things...
I can justify. I understand. I wouldn't criticize people.
Right.
It's a burnout, but you know something? I think it's a combination of burnout, but also I don't know, there's a certain victim mentality that I see by many people. They like almost feel like, I'm nobody, and what power do I have? Maybe they're bigger people than me. They're not accomplishing anything. That type of approach.
Or they tried and things didn't move in the direction that they thought.
Okay, that too, yep. But look, you're sitting at this table with me here. I just do not have any of that. I don't even have a cell in my body that thinks like that. And even if I do, I know right away it's coming from the wrong place. That's just not, that's not how you I can't see how you can live a life like a real significant life that way.
Well, some people really struggle with it.
I understand. I wouldn't even criticize them.
Right.
The question is, how can you get them to change shift their thinking? Look, that most people, Thoreau wrote that most men live lives of quiet desperation. You ever hear that line? Most men lead lives of quiet desperation. Maybe only men, maybe not women, I don't know.
I think more men, yeah, because men are more like, they're more introverted and they don't like to show fear.
What means quiet desperation? They get, at some point, listen, when we're 16, 17, 18, or even younger, we're idealistic. We have that spirit, the energy. What happens as we get older? I mean, each of you can describe your own trajectory as you see fit. What happens is things you start slowing down. You know, like anything. Just like your arteries start hardening, your spirit also, and your idealism.
You get disappointments.
And failure. And to the point where I meet people, they tell me, once upon a time I was such a dreamer. And today, if a day goes by and nothing bad happened, I feel success. So at least I didn't come out backwards. In other words, they didn't go forward, but they didn't go backwards. And I want to cry when I hear that. Now, it's easy to gravitate to that, because the fact is, you sometimes have accomplishments, and now it's time to retire. The thing is, either my own spirit is a restless one, I've also been around people that were not that way. So I try to think, I don't think like that. But of course, most people, if you compare the idealism of a 17-year-old to a 37-year-old, or a 47-year-old, a 57, of course it goes down. No way it's going up.
It depends. There's people who've had success and they build on success, and then there's some people who've not had success and then they maybe lose their confidence, or they lose
correct.
They lose their
It's
idealism.
a constant battle with yourself to be that way. My father's like that also, but I think it's something that you work on and you build and you have to go through. You can't, it's just not a spirit. You know what I'm saying? All kids have great spirit, and then they build fences throughout their lives, and they get more insecure for things that happen to them. So I think it's just something.
I agree entirely. I totally agree. And what happens, the natural inclination of most people at some point comes, you know what, I don't have to fight every battle. I'll accept what I have, my reality. I thought I would have excellence. I don't have excellence. I have a little less. Be happy with what you have, and they don't necessarily continue to climb. And that's that. Now, we're not here to tell people what to do, but you would like to believe that you want to help people get to maximize as much as possible the fulfillment of their aspirations, even as they get older. So maybe Mashiach is exactly that, to keep the spark alive, even when things don't always work out the way you thought they did. Even that is itself a message. That we do not, just because something didn't work out or something setback, we don't give up. We don't give up. I've never heard from you words to give up. I know, I'm sure you feel that way many times. But I don't see that you are acting on it.
And I have children.
Okay, so maybe they're keeping you alive, in the real way. And you think without children you'd given up?
I sometimes wonder who I would be after the Holocaust, the person that gave up or the person that rebuilt.
I can tell you, a little I know about you, but I can tell you that it's true your children is definitely a major motivator, but I don't think your personality, you may give up for a week or two, or there'd be times you'd be like into your, retreat, but I don't think you'd stay there. No way you'd stay there. Your own dignity wouldn't let you. At some point you would say, this is not, I can't be that way. There are people, because I think it really goes into what it says, like, you go in a certain way, you come out a certain way. You're a certain person before this happened. And that, if you were a different type of person, maybe. If you're a person who are in general a quitter, then this may have caused to really quit. But you're not a quitter by definition. You wouldn't build what you're building. You wouldn't do a lot of things you're doing. That's... In other words, when you have that spirit, no matter what happens, it doesn't disappear. I'm convinced that anyone that the Holocaust really caused them to commit suicide, for example, or other things, that had to be not just because they suffered. A lot of people suffered. Is because before they entered, they were probably weak already. And again, I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying the facts. I find that most Holocaust survivors actually went to achieve great things, despite their pain. They built businesses, they felt a need, almost like a guilt, to compensate that which was lost. Your grandfather was that way, I met him, I knew him.
Wanted to survive.
Yeah, and quite a few.
It's different though, because it's like, they just want to, they have nothing to lose.
Yeah, it's also fearlessness.
They fear.
No fear.
It's different.
Yeah, that's true.
You're kind of like that.
Right.
Aside for, the kid, like, you lost everything basically, so you feel that.
The people around me that I grew up with that have suffered. My father lost his parents. By the time he was 19, he had no parents. He had 2 little brothers to deal with. No language, came here after World War II, etc., etc. And to deal with a 7-year-old little orphan boy, where are you going to put him? And it wasn't like he was their father, he was their older brother. So people I saw in my life that have suffered greatly, thank God, they all built in unbelievable ways. They've achieved greatness, to be honest. But I meet other people that's not that way. So to me, that they were wired.
They had an enemy to direct their animosity towards. So in some cases, maybe people were angry at God or questioned God, but I still think that the enemy was kind of like, it was like the black, like the Black Knight and...
Yeah, there's an identifiable enemy, yeah.
I think that a lot of the anger or, went towards the Nazi regime or whatever the communities that turned on them, and even though ultimately maybe they could question God how He could allow it to happen, there was still a visible enemy. But when you have something like an illness, the enemy is Hashem. Hashem is the enemy. He's the one who created and perpetuated it, and it's clear. It's not like you can blame anyone else. Mm-hmm. So it's a dilemma. You're in a dilemma. It's like I go to daven in the morning and I'm like, I'm thanking you. I go to say Shema. I say like Shema Yisrael. Listen, Yidden. Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Screw that. Why would I want you guys? Why would I want to put you guys on his camp when he just wronged me? It's like I say Shema and I'm like, wait a second. I can't say this anymore. I used to love to say Shema. Everybody, Hashem is our Hashem. He's our Hashem. He's one Hashem. Now I'm like, oh, but now he's the bad guy. So now what do? Now I tell everybody to listen to you? No, I'm kind of angry at you. So no, I have a real dilemma. I'm mad at the guy that I'm supposed to be in love with. Really mad.
I'm with you.
They go, you have to... What? Wait a second.
But
I don't want to be after you.
So what's your alternative?
I don't know. Right now I'm pretty pissed. And I came in pretty pissed, so.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you. I'm not going to argue with you.
How do you pray in love to Hashem that just did something that was so painful to your personal life and family? And like Simi says, it's her children.
Okay,
you
so
took my children's father away. You took my grandchildren's father away. Now you want me to be nice to you and daven to you and love you? I'm having a real issue with that.
you know something? Sometimes the Shema and the Vahafta takes the shape of yelling and screaming at God instead of saying, I love you. You could say, I hate you. It's also a relationship. That's what a relationship is about. At the end of the day, I think you're going to need God more than He needs you. So
I do think about that sometimes.
I think you want to be on His good side too. I didn't
Like,
mean
it's
that. No,
funny,
I didn't mean it. I know it sounded.
I can say no to Ani.
No, it sounded a little
I can say,
threatening. It's like the head of the mafia guy says, I understand you're angry at me, but you're going to need me at the end, so you better straighten it.
It's also easier to have someone even to be mad at. Like I'm saying, even believe.
One second. I totally identify. I have nothing that you said is irreverent to me, disrespectful. First of all, as I said before, God, I don't worry about God. He can take care of Himself. He's been around before us. And as they say about Nietzsche said, God is dead, and then it says, God says Nietzsche is dead, you know? So God, I'm not worried about at all. I see, to me also, God comes down to this. Everything you're saying is justifiable, but at the end of the day, it is our souls that are going to give us strength, and the soul is, at the end of the day, also from God. So whatever gives us blessings comes from God, and also the curses come from God. So what do you do about that? We only like to have half of it, but it's very hard to separate the two. So in a way, your inner strength, whatever strength that is going to be, is going to come from somewhere. There's no devil. There's no one else to turn to. So anything that gives you life is the same God that you're angry at. So I think you just, fine, be angry, vent, yell at Him, go for it. There's no issue with that. There's no problem. Moses did it, Abraham did it, they all yelled at God. And they finally got what they wanted. So maybe yelling will help. You have a full right. Anyone that has endured what you guys have endured has a full right to stand face to face to God and say whatever you want. Absolutely. Because, yeah.
So how do you love the same entity that you...
You think, you want a philosophical answer or you want a personal, an emotional answer? There's no philosophical answer. You come to realize that God is a little more than just a black and white thing. That the package is complex. Maybe that's how it comes down to. It's like a big picture here. There's a big complex picture here. Some of it is horrible, that you really hate, and some of it is beautiful, that you love. Because at the end of the day, you have children. Who gave you those children? They didn't come from nowhere. It's also God-given. So it would have been better not to get those blessings. Better, had you never met Shua and never married him and never discovered him, you'd still be a single person. Would that have been better? Then, I'm not, by the way, minimizing what it is. I'm just saying you have to look at all of that. So all this pain would never have existed had God not brought you the love you had. So then you say, okay, so why didn't you let it continue? I don't have an answer. I don't know. To me, it comes down to this. It forces you to have a deeper relationship with God, which includes the anger and all that, and ultimately find deeper strength. And I think it will come from God, as odd as it sounds. The same one you hate is going to also give you strength. And I'm not trying to.
Well, it makes a little bit more sense because I've had some Christian friends say some things to me, and I like, it really makes me angry. Not because they're Christian, but they'll say like, God is putting you through the fire. It will make you stronger. And I'm like, just shut up. Like, thank you. I don't really want to hear that. But God, will be your salvation. And I'm just like, okay, just like, I really just can't deal with that. But in a certain sense, the way you're saying it is a little different. But you're saying that
I know, yeah,
it's the same source, and that somehow it's complex, and you have to find your way of making peace with it. So I guess in some sense that makes some more sense to me.
Last week, every Sunday night I deal with questions. I have a program called My Life Chassidus Applied. So last Sunday night, a person said the question they read in Tanya that the hidden good is greater than the revealed good. In other words, when you suffer, there's a hidden good in there, but it's greater than the revealed good. So the question the guy asked me, whoever, a woman or man, I don't know, it's anonymous, said, so then why do we pray for goodness? Why do we pray for revealed good? Why do we bless each other that it should be revealed good if hidden good is greater? And the answer is very straightforward, because the same God that can hide the good can also reveal the good. And goodness is part of God's plan, not just our plan. If it said that God said, you know what, accept everything I do for you, it's not your business. But God said, I want to give you a good life. I am goodness. Goodness is part of godliness. And when it's not good, pray that it should change and do everything possible. So then we're faced with a paradox. How could a good God allow not good things to happen? And I'm not going to go and answer that there's really deeper good, even though that may be true, because there's the emotional, personal relationship. So my response is, you know what? Yell and scream, and let's try to change the course of how it is. And but as I said, it is complex. I don't have the easy approach is just to dismiss it all and say I don't understand the good, but it's really there. I don't think will work for you at this stage of the game. Maybe in 5 years from now, and that's your right to determine that. So at this point, I really firmly believe that the people who marched to the gas chambers and they sang Ani Mamin and they said Shema Yisrael and Vahafta that you mentioned, it was not because they were delusional and they were loving God who was doing this to them. I think it was saying basically to everyone, you can kill our bodies, but you can't kill our souls. You can take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And if it won't be us, it'll be our children. And if it won't be our children, it'll be our grandchildren. I think the declaration of faith by people who are suffering in the hands of God is not just saying, oh, you know what, I accept you even though you're hurting me. It's my lifeline that I know that I'm going to survive. And it will come from godliness, even the same time when everything is going bad. That's why there's so many that say that they lost, after the Holocaust, you want to know who they lost faith in? I lost faith in human beings. The only thing I have is God. Is this a contradiction? I think it is. So be it. So we have contradictions. Let me ask you something. It's not a challenge. Until this happened, there were tragedies in the world. I know people. And we cried with them. But it weren't bothered as they were. So we ourselves can be insensitive when it doesn't happen to us. Now, I'm not saying this, God forbid, in any way. I'm saying this because I think I'm coming from a good place. I'm not saying to be critical. So it's bothering us because it happened to me. It's not because there's just tragedy in the world. Because there's plenty of tragedies to go around. And that, again, does not make it less. But you have to remember, this is your personal journey right now. Because God, unfortunately, tragedies have happened before, and there's still tragedies that happen. And yes, we don't take it the same way unless it happens to us, when it happens to us. So that's why I'm saying, I'm reiterating again and again that I don't think it's about an answer that you're going to find. Because answers, there's always big answers. There's always, answers, not explanations, answers. You need to find a personal way to get through this thing. That's why I think it's very apropos. The only way out is through. You have to get through this. The line, there's no way out but through. We wish there was a back door and there was some like that. You're right now at the boundary between life and death, and goodness and evil, and as well as absurdity and sensibility. You're right there, and you see both sides, because you're in this world dealing with family and so on, but you've seen things that most people should never see. You've seen the side that is not that. It's like going into the engine room where you see things that, God's mysterious ways of doing things. And most of us are not exposed to that. We go through our lives and days. That to me is how I look at it. I think it's like seeing the abyss. It's a very difficult thing for a human being to face that. because there's nothing. We don't have the tools to face such unfathomable experiences. We are limited tools. At the end of the day, we don't have tools for this. We have tools to live our lives. We face normal challenges. Husband, wife, have children. We all have financial challenges, this challenge, that challenge. But we're not, when it comes to this becomes...
I do keep thinking that. I keep thinking that there's nothing I can do, nowhere I can go besides just beg Hashem. Because, where am I going with this?
What are you begging for?
Salvation.
Get through.
I have a question.
This is raw. What can I say? It's real. I feel, I feel like lost when we talk this time. I say it all the time. But we still got to talk, so we talk. I really feel that way, I remember first times when I was much younger, meeting, I know you want to say something, can you hold it a moment? Yeah. I remember meeting people who've gone through very horrible things in life, abuse, things that I first I didn't even believe it's possible. Being hurt by parents in horrible ways. I don't really want to repeat how horrible. And by choice, I'm not talking about God doing something. I'm talking about human beings suffering at the hands of other human beings. And in the worst part. And I remember in the beginning I used to say to myself, first, as I said, I almost didn't want to believe it. Then I saw it happen. And then, of course, also tragedies that come with through God's hands, illnesses, diseases, and things like this. And I think I even wrote something then, which was just too raw to publish. So I never published it. But I remember thinking, life is like a mountain. It's my own stupid analogy. I don't know if it's worth anything, and a mountain where the sun is shining on one side, and the other side doesn't see the sun, because it's like on the other side of the mountain, so it's only shadows. And when things are going well, you're climbing this mountain on the sunny side. Sun shines, you have blessings, ups and downs, but you're more or less on the sunny side. And then there's some people who, for whatever strange reason, end up on the other side of the mountain, where their life is hell. And sometimes a living hell for an entire lifetime even, from childhood on. I just read yesterday a letter someone sent to me, how their father used to punish them because they weren't good at school. And Shabbos became the day they dreaded most. So Sunday was 5 days from hell, 6 days from hell. Monday was 5 days from hell. That's the child now married. You have to read this letter. It's so I read it online, and so there are people who are thrown into the other side of the mountain, but they're still on the mountain, but they don't see it, and there's nothing light about it. It's all full of darkness. And then you climb the mountain, and then there are times where these two people meet at the top of the mountain, where one side is light and one side is dark. And I was writing about my own experiences meeting people, and I felt like I'm meeting them at the peak. But I did grow up in the light, but I'm able to understand that other side. And we meet a place where God sees both the light and the dark, and they both come from the same place. And of course, everybody would love to be blessed to be on this side. So, as I write about my experiences of seeing people who live their lives in shadows. And I really do believe there's a place you come to which no human being should ever be faced, to see God, but that's beyond dark and light. Because that's the hardest thing to see, because it doesn't make any sense. And there's no way that we can handle it. That's the thing. But experiences like your experience, you're exactly at that point. Everything going well, then you come to a point where you have to face God, and there's no tools, there's no safety net. You're like free fall, absurd, irrational, and all the feelings that you have. And it could be the love and hate and all of that. That's why I firmly respect it, and I think you have to be able to articulate it, and you should not be judged, or anyone saying, you're being a little chutzpahdik or something like that. I remember something, I'll tell you this is the only time that the Rebbe spoke this way. Well, Mrs. Lapine, remember the Lapine story? It was 1992. And you know the story on Lefferts Avenue? What happened? She was attacked, and she did not let herself be violated, and therefore she was killed. She was killed because she did not want to be violated by this person. He would not kill her. And the Rebbe talked about it, and it's horrific. The event was horrific. But you could see the Rebbe took like personal responsibility because she was a Baal Shuvah and she moved to this neighborhood. It's like almost like, without the Rebbe didn't say it as much, but he alluded that it was not for him, she would never be here. This thing would have happened. So the Rebbe wasn't like expressing that he's guilty, but you could see he was very shaken, if you could put it that way, and very personal. But then he says something there that I never ever heard from the Rebbe. There's a pasuk in Koheles that says that when you start speaking about God, why God did things, be careful what you say. Be careful when you speak about God. The pasuk in Koheles says that. I forgot the exact words. It says, be careful when you open your mouth, because God has been before you and been after you. It's almost like, it's not threatening, but it's almost like suggesting, you better be, you know. And the Rebbe brings that verse. He says that even though it says in the pasuk that we have to be careful, which he never did. He literally brings the verse like he's almost putting himself on the line. I'm ready to speak, so to speak, about God, even though the verse says I shouldn't. You hear it. I've heard it a number of times. Very, very rare. I never, and the Rebbe was a Rebbe. He's not like a little kid. He knows what he's saying, what he's not saying, and so I think what I learned from that is that there are times where there's that point where I think a person who's gone through that fire can speak that way. That's why I feel there's I feel that there's a need sometimes to do it, but it's not going to get you answers. You'll just maybe vent, maybe you'll feel good a little. It's like kicking God. You want to kick him, go ahead. As I said, it's like kicking your father. Sometimes you do it, and that's what it is. I know it sounds funny, but
now I'm like, I understand the Tower of Babel. Let's get to the top.
Look, if God is, listen, let's be honest. I mean, your mind will understand this. I don't know if your heart. If God is God, He doesn't have to answer to us. Let's be honest. He created us. This whole existence wouldn't exist. If God is, it's true. If God was one of us, and I did something like this to you, you'd say, what the hell? Now, I'm not saying I still think you can challenge God, but at the end of the day, God is not us, and that's the end of it. And the mysteries of life are the mysteries of life. I think I mentioned the first time you were here, that verse in Eiyuv, in Job, when God says, were you there when I created heaven and earth? You asked me why there's death. You asked me why there's life. You asked me why there's pain. You asked me why there's joy. In other words, you have to go back to that. You want to go back to the drawing board? The drawing board is where I put everything into place, and I put life into place, and I put beauty into place. And yes, part of it comes with another side to things. And we still complain, and we still have the right to, and we do believe that Mashiach will come, and there will be only good. And this is not this is not like we have to live the rest of history with good and evil, or with pain and joy. Pain will come to an end. Now you could say to me, I never saw it. No, just like your child's your 7-year-old. Yeah. I also never saw Mashiach come, and I've not seen a world where there's been no pain. But my belief in the picture of a God that created a world for purpose, it compels you to say that there has to come a point where the purpose will be realized, even though it has not happened yet. But it's more logical than to say the world is going to go on forever without any end in sight, and we have to just suffer forever and ever. Now you could say that we don't like to believe that, but I think that's what we all really embrace. I see from the point of view of the Jewish history, look, we have a much better world than we have had. It's far from perfect, but it's very far from what it once was. And I know, is any of this... what? I don't even know. I mean, I'm just...
I appreciate it.
When you put up the last time the videos, I got a few emails, more than a few. They say, I never saw you like this. You always explain things and all that. Here you're sitting so vulnerable and all that. So I said, look, first of all, I feel I'm always vulnerable, just I know how to package it, But anyways, I'm just... You have to be crazy to try to explain.
In this world, to like the processes realize that. Do you feel like that?
That what?
I'm saying that you like. Do people that live with Mashiach feel like they're suffering to the time?
I'm like one. I'm like you. I'm not that. Don't make me so holy that I live with Mashiach all
No, I
day.
know that. I'm curious.
I have a nice, good Yetzer Hara, you know.
I'm saying even your perspective. No, I know that.
No, I know. I understand what you're saying. Does it make it less? I think it's like what Viktor Frankl does. I don't know if you read him, Man Search. I don't think it's about that you suffer less, but you have more options. Just like you're more diversified. Like like if you knew there was only one path and that path is closed, it's all over. But if you have 50 paths, so you know what? It's really bad, but you have where to fall back on. That's what I think it is. You have more resilience, and you have more what's the word for it? Expansiveness. So you're just able to rely on different strengths. No, it's still horrible.
It's still human.
There's no one that suffers. There's no one that suffers less.
Cynicism in life. Because rather than saying like everything is always going to be bad, there's like a sense of, it lightens it because you're not feeling so negative and cynical. You're feeling like, okay, this is bad, but on the other hand, it's not always going to be bad.
I really think it's like what I don't like to compare it to investment diversification. If you put all your eggs in one basket, what's going to happen? If that basket's gone, everything's gone. But if you put them in many places, it's what the Friedrich Rebbe said to the guy that pointed the gun to his head, and said that this toy can frighten someone who has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds. I think, and this was not said as a cute bumper sticker. This was said with a gun at his head. And then when they spoke in Yiddish, it was a Jewish captain, a guy that was grandfather was a chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. And when the Friedrich Rebbe, then he said to the Friedrich Rebbe, we'll see who will prevail, you or I. And the Rebbe said, yes, we'll see. This guy was executed a few weeks later, and the Rebbe came out of prison and came to America in a wheelchair with all the suffering. So to me, that's a story that is a real story, because he had a strength that you can't take away from someone. He had his faith, and he knew, you know what, you kill me, not that he wanted to be killed, but you're not going to frighten me with death. I'm not scared of your threats. I'm not scared of your gun, and I will not bow, like Mordechai doesn't bow. At the time, it seems very almost reckless, but it was his spirit. Friedrich Rebbe writes in his diary, which he calls, by the way, Tractate from Hell. He called it Masechta Gehenim. He wrote a whole diary of his time in prison. He says, I made a decision. I am not going to let my spirit be in any way affected by this. I will not cooperate. He didn't speak in Russian, even though he was fluent in Russian. He wanted for his own pride and dignity, and it cost him a heavy price. They tortured him a lot for it. But he didn't let them win. In his heart, he would not let them win. And yeah, he could have been killed, but he wasn't killed, and he came out. So, but he came out scathed. He was very, tortured and affected his health and all that stuff. So I think that's what happens. You have more to rely on. There are people in Russia, the old Soviet Union, former Soviet Union, who, when they were tortured, they became informers. Hasidic Jews who came back to their towns and would inform the authorities on people who go to shul. They would even inform on their own siblings and spouses and children. I know it's one of the darker chapters, like the kapos. To save their own skin, they turned in their own brothers and sisters. It's not spoken a lot about because it's a very embarrassing piece of history. Some of these people were killed by their Jews because they were dangerous. They actually killed them because it's a Muslim. I'm talking about a real informer that sometimes came to a town and the next day 30 Jews disappeared and were killed because they were informed upon. And I always think to myself, okay, so what was it that took some people who were tortured and they would never do anything like that, and others gave in? Because they pushed to the edge. And I'm not even judging them, to be honest, because who knows? Most people, if no one knew, How would you behave if you were really pushed to the edge? You know, I would like to believe. I would like to believe you're scared, and you say, no one's going to really know. Meanwhile, I'm protecting myself. You find all kinds of excuses. The reason I say it is because I think when anyone's pushed to the edge, you really start seeing what they're made of. And I know people that were not that way. My grandfather was not that way. He was arrested, and they tortured him, and they broke his fingers, and they broke his spine, but he would not become an informer. Now, that means he had something in him that they couldn't break, because he had the faith. Now, he could have said to God, you're letting me be tortured, I'm giving up on you. But for him, it was the opposite. God was what gave him the spirit to be strong. That's what I mean. It goes both ways. And you really can argue both. Who would judge someone that's being tortured like that and say, it can't be angry? Of course he could be angry at God. They only tortured him because he was Jewish. It wasn't because he was... That's why I'm saying I don't think it ends up being a philosophical debate about God. It really comes down to what you're made of and what strengths you gain from any given situation. Here I have no doubt. I am convinced, absolute, without knowing you, that, and I know your mother-in-law a little less, but I know her as well, family, you will be stronger, and you will help other people who unfortunately, hope nobody ever goes through anything like this. But anyone that has gone, you will help them. And it won't make sense how. It'll just be because you know how to speak to them. You'll know how to access. I'm not going to take away any of your pain. I should have said that right at the outset today. So that's for sure. What?
You said that right last time.
Yeah. So that's not given. If anything, I may give you a little strength or give you some resources, a little more insight of what your soul has that you can lean on. That's how I see it. That's really what we're doing here. Because I just want to make, I just don't feel, I don't want to feel the pressure that I have to take away your pain. That's the bottom line. I want to be able to sleep peacefully. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say.
There's not much we can argue or add, because what you're giving us, for me at least, is like a dose of strength, or like a deeper understanding, purpose.
Does it help to talk about these things, by the way?
Yes. It helps me to write it out, to get it out, because I'm constantly thinking about all these things.
Right. So it's better to talk than to be silent.
Yeah.
Okay.
A few days ago, Simi's like, I'm not I need to speak to Simi. I need another dose. I need something.
I'm ready to, all the doses you need, I'm ready to give doses.
Oh, wow. So it is, I think, for all of us who have, And sometimes
empathy.
It doesn't always, for me, doesn't internalize always right away, but hopefully it can make a difference.
I'm glad I came, definitely.
I will tell you like this, Simi, and I say to you as well, I really believe this. When you came in, I was on the phone with a woman who works for the Wall Street Journal. And she was at a talk I gave last week. Last week when the Kinnis HaShluchas, the Shluchas were here.
Oh, yeah.
So they were the guests of the Shluchas. So Saturday night I spoke at the museum for them. And I titled the talk, Me Too.
Oh, that was a good title.
Yeah. And what I said was that instead of Me Too being a movement of just, we're also victims, and we're also all been hurt the same way, and we're all together, and we're not going to tolerate it anymore. I said, that's very good. At least there's that voice of strength. But there's a bigger Me Too that can happen here. Why don't the women lead a revolution in the world to say we're going to heighten the standards of what the sanctity of relationships are about, and the sanctity of sexuality, and the sanctity of commitment. Because just because it's not, it's only problem is if it's non-consensual, and if it's consensual, there's no problem with Harvey Weinstein being whoever he wants to be with, and everyone's sleeping around, and he has children at home, So let it be a Me Too instead of we're all victims. Why don't we just become leaders of using this crisis as an opportunity to really heighten the whole, talk about consciousness. This to me is Mashiach talk.
Right.
That's it. So I say the same thing here. To me, that's exactly what it'll lead the way. Anyway, so she was there. And she was so taken by it, she wants to write a whole article about it now. So we'll see where it goes. But yeah, but that's the approach to me, because that's how I've been trained. That's
Me too.
right. Me too, but let it be a positive Me Too instead of I'm another victim, which again I say it's better than nothing, but that's not the end of the story. Because it comes down to, okay, fine, we'll bring down all these strong men and all these corrupt and all that. And then,
There will be others just like them.
yeah, and also this is a real opportunity, but that's already, it's opening up a Pandora's box, because nobody really is ready to go that far. They're ready to talk about against rape and against harassment. But what about relationships in general? Shouldn't the relationship be a little, what's going on? Huh?
Right. It's the same as the gun control.
So I'm saying it, to me, I think that ultimately, sitting here and talking about this stuff, you're uniquely positioned to be able to talk about certain things that others can't talk about because of what you've gone through. And I don't know if you're ready for that yet, but at some point I think you can lead a movement here to be able to help people. Yet another, yeah. Right. A movement of
But she could do it through her business.
Absolutely. I know,
Have the followers.
absolutely. My wife tells me, my wife was left as an orphan at 7 years old, lost her mother. And then, lost her brother, lost her father, and then Rashi Minkowitz, her niece, that whole pasha. So plenty pain to go around there from every direction. Sarah Lieberman, lost a mother and a daughter. Also, it was Fluke, 37 years old, blah, blah, in Alpharetta, supposed to lie down, and that's that. With 9 children, what do they have there? Yeah.
Does he have an aneurysm?
That's what it seems to be. She had a headache, she was about to give a class. She went up to lie down, and that was that. So why am I saying it? Oh, okay, so of course I'm in the family I see, and they are a tremendous family. Their grief has only turned into strength. They've turned it into strong families. There's no excuses by them. They don't look at any of their tragedies as like, a cop-out. Because this happened to me. They have dignity, and they really have built tremendous, healthy families, one after the other. If you know them at all. You know them, right? Mm-hmm. Unbelievable lesson. I mean, I see it. I see it with my own eyes. To me, I'm in awe of it. And they're healthy. They're healthy people. They've not escaped. But Sarah, for example, tells my wife, Shandy, I have to live in denial. I can't live with my daughter. I've disappeared like that. So every day is for me, I'm some living fantasy land. But she's smart. She knows that she's doing it, and she acknowledges it. And she lives in her little world. But she's an educator. She's active. She's not sitting alone in her house, She's dedicated. She's dedicated to the cause. That's what carries her. The cause carries her. She's very chassidish, very bottle. She's an educator. This is her mission. She's a soldier. They have that attitude. That, I think, carry them a lot. The soldier. We are soldiers in the army, and you don't quit just because it's difficult. That's a thing they picked up from their father and from their grandmother. They have that driving force. Why am I saying it? Oh, so my wife started going to this thing called Links. Links is a movement made by, it's not Chabad, it's children who lost parents at premature age. And my wife was invited to one of them. Like they do these Shabbatons, and they treat them like queens. It's women, either a father or a mother. And I'm mentioning really not because of your situation, I'm just mentioning because I see something going on there. I see people coming out, hundreds. And my wife has introduced a lot of the Chabad girls that have similar stories. And she comes back with such amazing stories of empowerment, how they're literally taking their loss and turning it into very powerful forces. And you really have powerhouses there. And I see it with my own eyes. Now, we all wish that they didn't have to go through this. But they're turning it into very positive force. Be good. I'm suggesting you should probably talk to my wife and hear about it. Not because you have to be involved or anything, but just great lessons in life stories. And I see it. And there's nothing like seeing reality. It has nothing to do with theories and philosophies. You see people, great suffering, and there are others that are coming in. My wife told me she brought a girl that didn't want to go, and she's very isolated and very broken. She lost her mother a number of years ago. So my wife, invited her in, and she stayed in her room. She says, you can stay in your room the whole Shabbos. But she finally came out, and I'm hearing how she sees others, and it gives her strength. So I see these things. I find them to be these are tremendous stories of heroism and resilience of the spirit. And I know, unfortunately, a lot of people who just refuse or just bury themselves. And I'm not concerned about it in this context here, but just wanted to mention that because I've been seeing that lately. Any of you have heard this thing called Links?
No.
if you know anyone in that situation, no.
And what about Rashi's kids?
Rashi's kids. So listen, they have families that people keep going there. That's not easy, but there's a lot of love and a lot of support. Honestly, I'm not following each of their lives. They're all teenagers. I mean, they're not. The oldest is now 16, 17. He began writing songs. He actually wrote to me. He wants to meet with you. Music is his outlet.
I met this one.
Yeah.
He wrote to me. He wanted to meet me.
Yeah. And they all are. They have good, loving support around them. That's the key. I can't tell you the details exactly.
It's not going to be easy.
Of course, not easy, but people like my wife and Sarah Lieberman have gone through it. They themselves were once like these children, so they're tremendous. They have a tremendous, besides empathy and their love for them, they also they've been through it. I just see great people. I see great excellence coming out. People who are not mediocre. People who don't take for granted. There are great, great shining examples. And it has nothing to do with the tragedy. I wish it never happened, but it did. And they're making.
They're finding.
Sometimes you could put it this way. Sometimes you could put God to shame, because you become a better person even though God did not treat you such a good way. So in a way, it's like you could have one up on him and say, what you did deserved this and this.
That's a shift way of thinking you could punish him.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like a passive-aggressive type of,
Tower Bobble or
Yeah.
It's like kill him with love,
yeah.
right? Right, kill him with kindness, yeah.
Thank you for the power.
Power, that's what I call, powwow.